Calling all stations. Clear the air lanes. Clear all air lanes for the big broadcast.
He disappeared over 65 million years ago. Now he's back. From the Bedrock Studios at WJOB in Hammond, it's T-Rex Live.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Huh? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
Are you trying to give me the double talk?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
Why don't you answer him?
He's talking pig Latin. I don't know what he's saying.
He's asking you if you swear.
No, but I know all the words.
How about face?
I won't do it. He don't pay my salary. It's a guy with a beard. I'll get up.
And truthfully, I'm a man of faith, and I love the Lord, and I'm not fearful of dying, and so that didn't frighten me.
Right.
It was just a reality. And I remember thinking, are you kidding me? I'm 40 years old, and this is how I'm going to die, on the side of the road in a car crash because I dozed off.
Done in by a street sweeper.
Right, exactly. I'm thinking not even a high-speed chase or anything, exciting like that. Just a mundane crash, And so what ended up happening was I pull up my shirt, and I see that the shirt sticks to the layers of skin. The seatbelt had burned through my shirt, and it cut through the layers of my skin. I could see the white meat in my body. It was pretty nasty.
Jeez.
And so as I pull up this shirt, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this hurts. And I begin to touch my ribs, inspecting each one of them.
Right.
Have you ever had a broken rib?
No, I have not.
They hurt.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure it doesn't tickle.
They hurt to breathe. It hurts to laugh, sneeze, cough. It's terrible. And it surely hurts to touch them. So I kind of touched each rib and kind of pushed on them, and none of them hurt.
Okay.
So I'm thinking this is good news.
That's a relief.
And I'm looking at this cut in my chest from the seatbelt, and I'm thinking that's also good news. That means if I was wearing my seatbelt, which I thought that I was, then I probably didn't hit the steering wheel. If I didn't hit the steering wheel, I probably didn't break my ribs. If I didn't break my ribs, I probably didn't puncture my lungs. Thus, they're not going to collapse, and I just might live.
More good news.
Absolutely. And so at this time, I start to stretch out my chest cavity and lean back, trying to do all kinds of tricks, calm my breathing, take deep, slower breaths, and it was working. It was working. And I remember thinking, all right, this is good news. And then I leaned forward, and I spit the blood out of my mouth, and I spit in succession to see if it would lighten up, and it did. As it started to lighten, I realized that the bleeding wasn't coming from my organs, rather my mouth. So I walked back to my vehicle. I'm looking through the side view mirror, and I stick my tongue out, and I see a nasty bite. I bit it. I mean, it was something nasty. And at that time, I was very grateful. I remember thanking God that I didn't bite it off, and secondly, that it was my tongue bleeding and not my internal organs.
Very true.
Anyway, I start to calm down, thinking, things are looking really good now. And finally, I hear a voice, and I presume he was talking to me the whole time, and I didn't hear him. He was the man in the street sweeper. He says, "Hey," and I turn around and I yell, "What?" And he goes, and based on my response to him, I presume that subconsciously I must have heard him, because when I answered him in frustration, like, "Why do you keep bothering me?
What do you want?"
Exactly. It was kind of like that. And he says, "Is there anybody else inside that car?" And I look at him and I said, "No." And so anyway, they asked me if they could call my wife, and I said, "No, I'll be all right." And the ambulance pulls up. To my surprise, they got there relatively fast. And I remember looking down at my side. I wear an off-duty holster, and I keep my pistol in as I drive home.
Right.
I remove my uniform top. I usually drive home in a T-shirt. And the force of the crash yanked my pistol right out of a holster where it's secured. It's not just you just can't pull it out. It's very difficult to remove. The force of the crash ripped my pistol out, threw it onto the floorboard of my car, and up underneath the dashboard. And I had to go and retrieve it. It was at that time that when I went to get my pistol out of the car is that I realized that there was fuel from that street sweeper pouring into the front seat of my car. Everything in the car was damaged. Here's my Bible here. It still smells like diesel 3 months later.
Does it?
Yes, it does. And so In any event, the fire department pulls up and they tell me they're going to take me to the hospital. And the most bizarre thing happened. I felt pretty good about my injuries, and I told them that I'd be all right. I was going to go home, take a nap, take some aspirin, and
Rub
he
it
looked
off.
at me, and then 3 doctors
Exactly.
walked in. And they said, "Hey, Mr. Burgos, how are you? I'm Doctor," and they said their names. I don't remember their names. And he says, we're the trauma team. They were the guys that greeted me when I came in the emergency room Thursday night at 6:30. I said, yes. I said, how are you doing? They said, we're doing well. How are you doing? I said, I feel like 950 grand.
Mm.
You know, I said, almost like $1 million. And they start laughing, you know, and I said, seriously, I feel great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they said, well, the night before somebody said it must be the morphine while you're feeling good, but the reality was I haven't had none all of that Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So Saturday morning I was feeling good, and I haven't had any morphine either other than to take some that night before I went to bed. So the doctors say, well, you need to rest. You know, rest is gonna heal you up just fine.
Mm-hmm.
So my question naturally was, can I rest at home? And they look at me and they say, well, sure, we suppose.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go home? And I said, I do. And I said, okay. And I'm looking at them and I'm completely perplexed.
Mm-hmm.
I said, question. And the doctor says, yes. You know, the one in the middle says, yes. And I said, what about the blood clots? And he looks at me. And he looks, it's funny because I can't even explain it. You had to see it. These 3 doctors, they looked at each other. They looked to the guy on the outside. They looked to the guy on the other side. They looked to the guy in the middle. They all looked at each other. And then they all looked back at me almost in unison. I mean, I almost laughed. It was hilarious. And the one in the middle looks at me and says, what blood clots?
Ain't that something?
And I smile and I said, you're telling me I don't have any blood clots? And they said, no. And I said, well, then I'm going home. Well, as I go home, I'm home by noon on Saturday, not even 2 days after my crash. It's just amazing at how well I'm healing.
Oh, yeah.
As I get better, I share this story I just shared with you with a friend of mine who's a nurse. And when I get to the part about when the doctor said, what blood clots, she looks at me like I'm crazy. And she says, and what do you think about that? And I said, about what? And she says, about those blood clots. I said, I had them, and they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I think that God did a miracle. And she looks at me and she goes, she pauses for a second. She believes in God, but clearly, maybe like the chaplain does.
Right.
And she looks at me and says, blood clots just don't go away. And I said, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So you tell me, is it more likely that God did a miracle and caused these blood clots to go away, which I believe he did when there's a multitude of people praying? Or is it likely that 2 very good medical institutions misdiagnosed the same symptoms, saying that this is what you have blood clots, but they were right on everything else?
Mm-hmm.
Broken sternum, broken ribs, fractured eye orbital, and blood clots. And they were both right on the right things and wrong on the same thing? Highly unlikely. You know, I know that God did a miracle.